Hi, everyone. Joe Minicozy here from Urban 3. Thanks for coming to our July month edition of our lab. We're going to wait a minute or so. We still have some people signing in. I see on the list here. My colleague Kate Ryba isn't in on the call. As other labs, she'll be here to respond to questions from the audience, but also serve them up to us as we talk forward. So let me see, maybe get show my main screen here. Okay. So today's lab is a little different. We'll follow the standard format of if anybody has questions or comments, if you could please put them in the questions tab that should be on your control panel for the GoToWebinar. And then Kate's going to field those when we get to the Q&A, and we'll try to keep them in order. I want to thank everybody for their questions that they brought to us. I hope that we can get to every one of them, but we do have a special guest today. And for those of you that don't know Kennedy Smith's work, we're massive fans of Kennedy Smith and what she did with the founding of CLUE. So I'm going to go ahead and give her an introduction. She's going to pop in at 1:15, and I'll try to get to some questions that you served for Urban 3 before then. But Kennedy is, she founded CLUE, which is Community Land Use and Economics, based out of Charlottesville. Before that, Kennedy was the director for downtown Charlottesville. I know Kennedy's work from her career then, but also what she's done with CLUE. And she's gone on to become a senior research at the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. If you don't know Institute of Local Self-Reliance, I highly recommend looking into their work. The analysis they do a lot of economic analysis about local businesses. But one of the questions that came up was around the matters of retail, and Kennedy has way more experience in that than we do. So I wanted to bring her and introduce her to our crowd, and she can share more about her work. On the questions for us, one of the questions that we've been getting a lot is around reparations. The city of Asheville just adopted a resolution on reparations, and one of the questions was, well, what does it mean? One of the things that we see around, and one is I want to commend my community for actually stepping up and saying something, but it needs to really have some meaning behind it. So this was in the New York Times. It's been in, it was in the APA newsletter yesterday. But if you read the article, there's some great comments in here. And I want to highlight Keith Young, one of our African-American counselor, who says it's simply not enough to remove statues. Black people in this country are dealing with issues that are systematic in nature. That is indeed true. It's beyond the statue. Now, it's good that we've gotten rid of the Robert E. Lee monument when Robert E. Lee never set foot in Asheville, but we're dealing with the Vance Monument and other monuments and statues. But Asheville really needs to identify what it did to itself, and we could start with redlining. And this is the redlining map of Asheville, in which we highlighted 12% of our city, predominantly the African-American neighborhoods, including the Burton Street neighborhood right here, in redlining. So for 30 years, there was an economic consequence to that. Flash forward, those same neighborhoods would receive the punitive measures of urban renewal and highways. As you've seen in past presentations we've done, you can actually measure that. So this is Kansas City, Kansas, and what we were able to demonstrate was the economic consequences to redlining. Here we are, 60 years after they stopped doing redlining, and you can see the redline neighborhoods are less than half the value of the yellow line neighborhoods. If those of you, let's take a step back. If you're not familiar with redlining was essentially created by the Federal Home Loan Program. So the Fed stepped in during the Depression and said we need to find a way for people to get houses, but locally y'all need to make a map of what's good investment and what's bad investment. And in most communities, they used it as a punitive device on their own populations, racial device in most of them. They would actually script out how many, and this is their terms, how many Negroes lived in each neighborhood. And if it had a high density, then it was considered hazardous. It's rough to say that, it's painful to say that, but it's a truth. There's a great book called Color of Law by Richard Rothstein that I'd highly recommend to get into and read. Um, and actually, he talks about several ways out of that. So one of the things you can do is remove single-family zoning as a protective device, because that has roots in this redlining as well. So there's things you can do, but you can start by measuring the economic impact and owning it and saying it happened in our community. You can actually pull the data and see that many of those African American neighborhoods were actually growing in wealth during the Depression, yet we still remove the ability for those families to build equity. And when I say equity, it's like I own my house, I'm paying to own it. Eventually, I do own it. That portion that I pay of my ownership outside of my mortgage is what I have as equity in my house. Now, if I remove the ability for somebody to buy my house, I lose that ability to retain that equity because I can't transact in the future on the value of my house. And that's what's happened in a lot of these neighborhoods for 30 years. Additionally, in Asheville, we cut a highway through these neighborhoods. So that's a transference of wealth out of those neighborhoods with a federal subsidy to pay for this project to happen. And that should be noted as well, that we used federal dollars to remove wealth from families. Notice how it doesn't hit any green neighborhoods. Additionally, there was things that Asheville did outside of the state and the feds. We used urban renewal dollars to cut into other neighborhoods with the MLK and Charlotte Street project. So those things should be identified as part of the reparations, that these are things that we did and we're going to work to make amends. In the early 2000s, around 2006, I was part of a group here in Asheville where there is a current highway design that even widened bigger the damage that we've already done to ourselves. And we got together and created a design center and took the Asheville design of what DOT is giving us and basically said, here's all the spaghetti that you're throwing in our community that's new. Can we just streamline it and make it narrower? We weren't saying don't do the highway. We're just saying we can make it better. We can make it less of an impact. We can work with the community on this. And this was our alternative 4B. That was from 2004 to 2006. From 2006 to today, we've been in sort of a battle with our state about what that looks like, and they keep on trying to expand it. So here's their original design. Here's what we did. Here's what it looks like now. So they took our design and they're fattening it up. So basically, here's the right-of-way that we're taking off the table. Notice how we're minimizing the right-of-way, and somehow they thickened it up. So let me be more crude about it. This is the new right-of-way that they're taking versus our design. Why are they doing that? What's the reparations and cost of that? What's happening? That should be measured. And additionally, if we're saying that we're going to stand up for our African American citizens in the neighborhoods that were impacted by this project, we should stand up and say something to our state. So yes, the original design was way worse. We've made it better, but this is better than this on the left, but it's still nowhere near the minimization of that footprint. Additionally, we should be standing firm on our request to get the land back. So here's the highway, here's the new path. Notice all the right-of-way. By the way, this is the public housing where they shoved all the African American folks that were in this neighborhood into that neighborhood. They can basically made barracks. That's not cool. We should point that out and talk about it honestly and say this is wrong. So moving the highway northward was one of the things that we were trying to do locally to basically rebuild the boulevard and mend that wound, repair the wound in our community. So this is our drawing that we did back in 2007 of the land that is currently all right-of-way, and this is the buildings. So here's the street view looking into downtown of all the right-of-way and highway, and here's the repair. So as the design team was doing this, and these are all volunteers, super awesome people in our community. And I remember we're doing this as volunteers. This wasn't the a city consulting firm that was doing this. But as the designers were drawing the buildings, I was running the numbers on myself and public interest projects, running the numbers on the future valuation, because we wanted to let this community know that the reason why we're doing those buildings is to get taxes on non-taxable real estate. That's $111 million worth of taxes that if we let DOT just waste all real estate, we're basically writing that check. That's money that we lose for schools, for parks, for affordable housing, for business incubation. Also, because all of that land is currently non-taxable, why not use it for starting up African-American businesses? We removed 215 African-American businesses with all of our urban renewal projects. Why don't we build that back? Why don't we invest on the land that we took from those neighborhoods. And we should be honest about that. So here's how DOT is giving us the drawing. And here we are, what is it, 15, 16 years later, and they still don't get it. I mean, look at this one intersection right here. Seriously, how are we going to develop on this land? Why did you take all of this land? And it's because they want to move cars at high speed. Do we need to do that? What's the trade-off? What's the opportunity? Additionally, why can't we get a double-decker bridge and reduce the footprint? So this was the original design that we showed, is just, let's just steal this Fremont Bridge from Portland. It's a double-decker bridge. They build bike racks to look like the bridge. I mean, can we do something aesthetically pleasing? And I kid you not, NCDOT told us, because we don't have a double-decker bridge in North Carolina, therefore we can't build one. I don't know, Kentucky's got 4. But, you know, my community needs to realize that this is the design of the bridge that they're putting over the roadway, over the river right now. And what's the cost of that? You know, why aren't we being honest with ourselves? If you're going to pass a resolution, run the numbers, do the math, and stop making more damage. And then let's go, speaking of the Burton Street neighborhood, here's a poll of the neighborhood. We're still taking houses. Here we are in 2010. This is a you store it place right here. You know, it's good that we actually are saving the church now. 2009, they were whacking the church. We had to get in the way of that. But do you really need to widen the roadway out like this to take all of these other businesses? Why are we not saying anything? Additionally, this is supposed to be a 6-lane highway. And if you count the lanes, we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How is 9 lanes close to being 6 lanes? Let's just count this stuff. And if you're like, okay, Joe, you're not being fair, there's merge lanes. All right, let's just count under the bridge here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lanes right there. 7 is not 6. So to me, what gives me pause as a citizen is this quote from our vice mayor. I hope that we will be just maybe a little spark that really gets the conversation going in Asheville, but in North Carolina and across the country. That's my vice mayor. That's it. That's all you're hoping for, is a little spark. Well, how about this? Let's tell NCDOT you are not taking more land out of our African American neighborhoods. You don't need to do it. You don't need to. We will gladly sacrifice 2 minutes of time to save our neighborhoods. And more importantly, why don't we scrap this? We're having a hotel moratorium in the middle of COVID. This is, I mean, notice the date on here. This is July 7th. Why are we going through the brain damage of spending time and resources on discussing hotels? Like, somehow hotels are bad. Do y'all realize our baseball team in town that we've had here since 1924 is called the Asheville Tourists? Tourism is our economy. Why do we need to study this to death and waste resources? And better yet, let's just read history. This is Thomas Wolfe from 1925. When our entire county population was 80,000 people, we had 8 luxury hotels and 250 private hotels. We are nowhere near that right now, yet we're going to waste resources and time to just talk and do lip service to hotels. Meanwhile, we have plans in the African American neighborhoods that the community fought for. Let's open those up and let's fund them. Let's not waste money on other resources. Let's put our money where our mouth is and invest in our African American community. Like, we have the wherewithal to do this, and I frankly want to hold my community accountable to do so. So it starts with this. It starts with the damage that we've done and that we were complicit with because we allowed other governmental organizations to clear the path to do this. The fact that my city did not comment on the EIS process for this billion-dollar project is reprehensible, and we need to own that, and we need to talk about that, and we need to repair these wounds because it's well within our control and our leadership. Okay, obviously you can tell I get a little emotional about this, but it's something that as a taxpayer in this community, we have the ability to take the higher path, and we should. So on to the next question. Can you lend perspective on significance of value per acre versus land value per acre and how they compare with costs per acre? Well, first of all, you know, these are basically 3 different metrics, and we use them 3 different ways. So think of it as you've got a socket set, you've got a screwdriver, and you've got a pipe wrench. Those are 3 different tools. When you start crossing them over, there has to be a reason why. But just when we do value per acre, like I'll just use Minneapolis as an example. This is the value per acre of the city. This is the land value per acre. two different models. This is the dirt value. When you put them side by side, you can really start to see the difference. And they're telling us different things. So we do the land value per acre model to basically see how the assessors set base policy, because land should all be relative based on its location. And when you look at it, you can see what the dirt value is around this lake versus this lake are two different things. And generally speaking, you see how these neighbors are fairly consistent. When we do this, we're looking for these weird little anomalies that pop up, because that'll tell us what's happening from a policy standpoint. When we see the lake difference, that's due to design. Basically, you have public access to these two lakes, so that dirt value is transferred into the neighborhood, versus private access at this lake, so all the value slides to the adjacent property. When you put buildings on it, it's a totally different animal, because those buildings all have different values and wealth. So you see that this map is much more spiky in telling you what's going on from a building standpoint versus the land standpoint. But I've gone over. I'm at 16 minutes in. Let me just do a little check with Kate. Has Kennedy popped in yet, or should I keep going? Kate, I'm not hearing you.
It looks like you can keep going for just a little bit. I don't see her quite yet on the webinar, so forge ahead.
When she pops on, just stop me. Throw a flag
Sure.
at me or something.
I will.
Another question was, our population of the city is stable, so how do we direct development in a more fiscally sustainable way? So for cities, particularly in the Rust Belt, or where I grew up in upstate New York, you're seeing cities actually shrinking in population. Like any business, or like what we're going through in COVID, when you're out of work, that's the best time to look at your expenditures and your checking accounts. So South Bend, Indiana is doing an incredible job with this, and we've been helping them along the way with looking at themselves. So here's their value per acre productivity of where they're building, and you can see their downtown, but also some stuff that's going on by the university. And this is just a little village that they're building of townhouses and mixed-use buildings, but it's highly potent. Here's their downtown right here. So this is Notre Dame is this big pad right there. But one of the things that they're looking at is, well, what's going on with our infrastructure? So on the lower left is a chart showing their population growth. And we just went back in time and pulled all this stuff. You can get this out of the census information. But you see their apex year was 1960. That was their best year ever. That was their highest population. And they're about 80% where they were in 1960. So they're not really adding people. You can see they've been coasting since 1980 pretty much. But on the right is a map that our chief analyst, Josh McCarty, did, animating their pipes going in the ground. And I'll drop a boundary when their population stops in 1963, so you can see what they did to themselves. Right about here is when their population stops. So you can see how they're still adding pipe while they're not adding people. So if you're adding cost on the same amount of people, everybody's going to be paying more money. And the problems that we experience with pipes and roads and all this, if anybody's read or followed Strong Towns, Chuck talks about this all day long, that we always have to pay for this stuff, that once the road and the pipe is in the ground, it becomes a liability into the future. So when you just chart their population growth in red against their pipe growth in blue, you can have the conversation and say, why is it we need so much more pipe per person today than we did in 1930? So why, were the people in 1930 camels? They could live with so much less infrastructure. Yeah.
Kennedy's here. Yeah.
Oh, Kennedy's here. Great. Okay, but this is how much pipe South Bend has now, and they have to pay for it. So we just, again, look at when you're not growing, when the music stops, it's a great time to investigate your information. So with that, let's do a transition over to Kennedy. And Kennedy, I'll stop sharing the screen, and you can take it from me. And turn on your camera. And I've given your intro earlier at the beginning of the webinar, so folks are ready to answer questions. And the question that really where we thought of you was this question about determining the necessary density for successful retail within a center area. And I think this must be from a Canadian because of the spelling of center. But basically, how much retail do you need to have in a downtown? And at that point, we're not experts on that, and so we reached out to you. I want to thank you for for hopping onto this webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn the show over to you and stop sharing.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
And you can see me?
Can see you too.
Okay, good. So let me turn the screen on here. And let me find my thing. So Joe knows this question. Can you see this PowerPoint now?
Not yet. Are you?
No?
Let's see. Kate, do you? I don't.
I don't.
Okay. Are you sure you gave the show to me?
Let's see. Kate, do you have the privilege access to make sure that
Yes,
Kennedy has the sharing privileges?
Good.
I
Got
just
it now.
changed it. Great.
Super. Okay. Can you see me or the PowerPoint?
We see both. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
good. Okay, so let's look at the PowerPoint. So Joe knows this question is near and dear to my heart, I think, because one of the things that I get asked this question all the time, and I've been asked this question for 35 years. And the answer is there's kind of no answer. I mean, there is an answer, but it's not what you think. People often just say, tell me how many square feet of clothing stores and how many square feet of restaurants we need. And there are market analysts you can hire who will, give you those kinds of numbers, but they don't really make a lot of sense. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that because of this internet thing that we have now, people can buy anything from anywhere. So it used to be that downtowns, neighborhood commercial centers were pretty, economically self-contained. They served the people who lived and worked there and occasionally visited, and you could kind of quantify that. But you can't do that anymore. And I've got a ton of examples of businesses that kind of prove this point, even some that are pre-internet. But one of my favorites is this guy in Rising Sun, Indiana, who has a concert and Celtic harp making business. He's right downtown. He's in a storefront. Pretty much everybody in Rising Sun who has needed a concert harp has bought one by now. There's no local market for his harps. He sells them all over the world. People find him online. They know him by reputation. But the thing that's so great is that if you're in downtown Rising Sun, you walk down the street and you hear this harp music kind of coming down the sidewalk, and you can look in his storefront window and he waves you in and he shows you how he makes them, and you can see him carving the headstock. And it's just an amazing visceral experience to have him in that downtown. If somebody asked me, how many harp stores can we support in downtown Rising Sun, I would say 0. But based on worldwide potential, you can, of course, support everything.
Kennedy, sorry, this is Joe. Are you advancing your slides? Because we're still got just the reference slide of the key.
Yeah, no, I haven't yet.
Okay, sorry.
But I will now. I wanted to kind of make that point about how it's not simple to just say this is how much retail density we need or something. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is why I have the PowerPoint slide up here, is that for, I don't know, 7 or 8, 9 years, I've been sort of in my spare time going back and looking at old Sanborn fire insurance maps to look at what businesses were located where when downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts were sort of performing at their economic peak, which was usually sometime in the 30s, 40s, or 50s. If you're not familiar with Sanborn fire insurance maps, they are just a wonderful, cool thing. The Sanborn Fire Insurance Map Company made maps of practically every town and city in the US, and I think they did some in Canada also, to map out what buildings were made of, how tall they are, where the windows are, what kind of heating system they have, basically all the things that someone who was an insurance underwriter might want to know about these buildings. So this first slides here you can see is just sort of the key for the color coding for different building types, construction types, and different references. And if I can advance the slide, this is an example. This is from Monroe, Louisiana. And you can see this is sort of their downtown core. They have a lot of brick buildings there, masonry buildings. The yellow buildings are wood buildings. The blue one is stone. And here's another view of it, and I'm going to look at this area here. And what we've been doing for a number of years is going back and just doing this tally of what kinds of uses were in these buildings. So you can't, it's impossible to read this. I'm going to enlarge this little space here, but you can see, looking at the south side of the South Grand Street block, you have a drugstore, used car sales, telegraph office, photographer, insurance agency, bank, Elks Club, Furs, bus station, auto top repairs, a milk station. Who knew there were milk stations? Sign painting, bicycle shop, apartments, and a filling station. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there's like not as much retail as you would think. And when you look at the rest of the district, you can see that a lot of the uses are institutional. There's a bank, another hotel, city hall, post office, church. What we have found in doing this is that typically retail only accounted for 15 to 20% of a district's overall composition. So here's a list of those uses from the south side of the block. Here are the uses on the north side. I've gone back and highlighted the ones that are retail, and out of the 32 uses on that main shopping street, only 7 of the 32 were retail. So that's about 22%. And when I add in all the other features there, I can stop showing my screen now. When you look at all the other uses there, it's, retail is just not a big component. I think that because we kind of think that retail is should be more significant, I think that's because we've grown up with a generation or two that are used to shopping malls where everything is retail. We have the expectation that downtown should have more retail than they actually realistically can support. And that makes sense. You want sort of a diversity of uses which generate traffic for each other and make the downtown a sort of healthy economic ecosystem again. So, I mean, there certainly are some retail uses you can predict based on the population size. The number of people who live and work in an area are going to need a certain number of restaurants and food markets and pharmacies, and those are very predictable. But it's all the other stuff that is unpredictable now, and so there's really no answer to how much retail density do you need. What do you think, Joe?
Great. Keep going. And one of the other questions we got was the economic impact of a full service grocery store in an underserved neighborhood. And we tend to get fairly specific, detailed questions about stuff that tend to be how let me turn my camera on, sorry. We tend to get questions on from people that tend to be things they're dealing with in their community. But what we try to do is get to the bigger picture. And I think that your method of looking at the Sanborn maps and seeing that the city is a dynamic that changes. I mean, just in your experience and working starting as a Main Street manager and dealing with the downtown at the grassroots level, if you could talk more about that in the arc that you've kind of seen, and now traveling around the planet, looking at cities and giving advice. And also, if you want, talk about what you're doing at the Institute of Local Self-Reliance.
Sure. I mean, I think that the arc, let me see, the arc, certainly in terms of downtowns, I think that one of the things that is happening now, and I think that the COVID pandemic is accelerating this, is that people are taking a new look at what's supportable. There have been so many national retail chains that have been tanking even before the pandemic, and now the pandemic has accelerated it. That means that it's triggering closure of shopping centers. I just saw a webinar the other day where a guy from International Council of Shopping Centers was saying that probably a quarter to a third of all Class B and C shopping malls in the country are going to close this year. That's enormous, and it's probably going to trigger a bit of a crisis in the commercial mortgage-backed securities industry, just like we had in 2007, 2008 with the residential crisis. All of this, I think, I'm suddenly hearing people finally talking about the fact that we're over-retailed, that we've built too much retail space in the country and in the world, and that it's just economically and environmentally unsustainable. You've heard me say before that I've done some research based on a Department of Energy study that they do, where they look at the energy consumption in different building types, and they've broken down based on that, their survey of how much commercial space there actually is in the U.S. In 1960, we had 4 square feet of retail space per person in the U.S. And now we now we have 41.7 square feet per
Wow.
person. So a tenfold increase at a time period when our buying power pre-pandemic had only increased to about $17 a square foot. So we have more than twice the amount of commercial space that we need. And the pandemic, I think, is really bringing that to a head. And we're going to see a lot of buildings, a lot of commercial buildings repurposed for other things, which could be exciting. One of the things that I'm already beginning to see communities talk about is I'm also coming out of the COVID pandemic, the need to have closer supply chains, and so I'm beginning to see some shopping malls and even a couple of hotels being repurposed as sort of multifunction manufacturing facilities, where communities can sort of poll the major employers in the community and find out what their needs are, especially institutional users like hospitals and city governments and school systems, and produce and source some of those things closer to home. So again, I think we are becoming sort of more self-reliant local communities in a lot of ways. There's still many, many communities who go down this rabbit hole of thinking that, oh, but the big box that's coming to town is going to bring X number of new jobs and, a Y amount of property tax revenue, without really thinking through, we're not generating new retail market demand because we're building more retail space. We're just shifting it from this place where it's already happening to this place. And the jobs that were here are just going here. So, and now we're losing property tax revenue here and having to take care of infrastructure that's decaying and all kinds of other things because this area is no longer economically self-supporting. Really important to kind of have that balance between retail activity, property value, property quantity to make districts work.
Now, do you have resources at ILSR that the audience can get access to? I know that Stacy Mitchell wrote The Big Box Swindle, and a lot of that data is in there. What other resources would you recommend for the audience?
Yeah, there's some excellent resources there. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of in the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, it has 6 or 7 different divisions. So they have a division that deals with community-based broadband, one that deals with energy grids, one that deals with recycling. The one that I'm working with is called the Independent Business Initiative. And so when you go to ILSR's website, ilsr.org, and look on the menu bar for initiatives, go down to independent business, and then you'll see everything that we have. There are lots of reports. We just released a new one this morning that I wrote on 26 things that local leaders, civic leaders can do right away to help businesses survive the pandemic. And it's organized with things you can do immediately, things you need to do next, and things that you can do sort of later, which include sort of fixing some of the imbalances and problems that we've seen emerge from this with regard to business development and cultivating a healthy business community. There also was a great report on dollar stores and their impact on communities, especially communities that have food deserts. There's an excellent report on the economic impact of big box stores, actually several case studies there. So lots of good practical tools that I think would be interesting reads regardless of what a community's particular issues are, because they do look at how all of these different economic issues are so completely interwoven and intermeshed. And so, dealing with one, you're invariably tugging on another, and you really have to think through what do we want our tapestry, our canvas to be for our community.
One of the things that you highlight with the Sanborn maps is the things of today are not the things of tomorrow, nor were they the things yesterday. And it's just this kind of very let's fuss less about the temporal aspects of city, but more think of the broad arc of cities. And there's a question from the community of what are the 3 most important metrics for city leaders to monitor. We're numbers people. I often bristle sometimes at some of this because it's just like people get in this trap of tracking numbers without seeing how they're connected to the big thing. But some numbers are important. Obviously, knowing the value of parking is 1/50th the value of a per square foot building. That's a subsidy. That's one of the metrics that we give. But what would be the 3 metrics that you ask people to look at or pay attention to?
This is such a tough question. It's like, what are your 3 favorite movies of all time? Because there's like 50 metrics that are important. And some of the ones that we measure are numeric also, like you do. Like I said, we talked about sort of the balance of retail activity and property value and rent structure. That's a really important one, because one of the reasons that downtowns got into trouble 50, 60 years ago to begin with is because of this cycle of disinvestment that happened, where you had an influx of surplus commercial space, more than you needed. That meant that with a surplus of space, rents declined in the older place that was not as well organized. As rents declined, less capitalized, less well capitalized tenants moved in. That meant the property owners were charging less money. They had less revenue coming in to take care of the buildings. That meant that the entire area began to be downgraded a bit, began to fall into disrepair. The buildings fell into disrepair. The city government wasn't putting as much money into infrastructure and services, and the whole thing perpetuates itself. So, I mean, you have to come in and sort of intercede in that cycle at some point and clip it and straighten it out. But by measuring what retail activity is, and then taking a look at can businesses that are here support this level of rent, that level of rent, and how does that translate into property value? One thing that's sort of a handy rule of thumb for retailers is that retail businesses should generally budget between 6 and 10% of their gross sales on rent. So you can, inverse that also and look at, okay, people are charging this for rent in this district. Well, that means a retailer is going to have to generate this much in sales to be able to afford that. Is that realistic? What do we have to do to help make businesses achieve that? So I think that's a really important one, is that balance. I also think it's good to measure, and this isn't really a measurement so much as it is an observation, where people are coming from that visit a district. One of the things that we do a lot of is put maps for a couple of weeks. We sort of enlarge a map of the region and mount them on foam board, blow them up to about 24 or 36 inches, and put them in a dozen different kinds of businesses, insurance agencies, banks, retailers, restaurants, for a couple of weeks, and ask people to just put a pin in this to show us where they're coming from. And that is mind-blowing, because you'll find, wow, here's this one business that looks like an outlier, and it's attracting people from 20 miles. And then there's this little struggling business that's only attracting people from 5 blocks. And is it possible, by creating some synergy between these two businesses, that you can expand the pool of customers for this business here? It's just an amazing thing that you can learn looking at that.
That's an amazing device. What a great idea.
Yeah, if I can figure out how to share my screen again, I'll show you.
You should just be able to just click the button. Show
Yeah,
us whatever you want. The floor is yours. You want anything that's fascinating for you? Let's see it.
Yeah. Okay. Give me one sec. Let me get this. Okay. Can you see this PowerPoint?
We're looking at the GoToWebinar screen, so you could just select whichever. There we go.
Yeah. Let me make this be a slideshow. So this is from Metuchen, New Jersey, and this is one of these map things that we've done. So here's a business called Two Chicks with Chocolate. That's where their customers come from. Marafiki Fair Trade, Buttery's Bakery, pretty big reach. Runner's High, drawing people from all over the metro area. Kai's Cafe is tinier and tighter. New Pearl Cleaners. Who would guess people are coming from like all the way, up north to come to a cleaners? But it is an amazing cleaner. So these things are they're fascinating. The What's New Men's Consignment is drawing very few people in person, but they do all their business online, and that's the reason. So these are the kinds of maps, and they're lots of fun to play with. On the sort of touchy-feely other kinds of measurements that we like to look at are just doing pedestrian counts downtown at night to see how many people are just out strolling and looking around. Because if it's a really fun, interesting, dynamic downtown and people like walking there, it's walkable, you're going to see a high count. If they think it's edgy and there isn't the kind of stuff they want to see there, you're not going to see them there. We even sometimes measure like how many ice cream cones are sold in the course of a week in a downtown to see how healthy it is.
Well, you raised an interesting point about helping those that are struggling to have some synergy or some cross-pollination. What I've noticed in my career is that people they don't realize these are individuals trying to keep a business going, and it's a lot of work, and they don't have the outside perspective of walking out across the street and looking back at their store, or knowing where people are coming from. They're just trying to make sure that their employees show up, they've got enough commodity,
right.
They can pay rent, they can pay their bills. So what are the aha moments that you have when you speak to a community about how to support the small businesses and how to get people into the mindset of, or into the shoes of the small business owner?
Well, those are kind of two very different questions. The first one, I would say, with the kind of aha moments, I think the biggest one is when, and I work mostly with downtowns, so that's kind of my kind of thing is mixed use districts, is people believe that downtown revitalization takes place downtown, and it actually doesn't. It takes place in the community's planning and land use laws and policies. You can rehab buildings and market the heck out of businesses all you want all day long, but if you're building a bunch of new commercial crap out on the highway, it's not going to amount to anything. You're just fighting an uphill battle. So that's a real aha, is when people realize, oh, wait, there's actually sort of an economic carrying capacity that our community has, and we need to not build beyond that, or we need to, get more people if we're going to have that. We need to make a choice. And actually take some bold steps and not just do what everybody else is doing in their comprehensive plan, but actually put forth a bold vision there that says, this is the kind of place we want. We want a walkable place with great schools and healthy businesses and a vibrant nightlife and a great cultural community, or whatever it might be, whatever you want. I've worked with communities that want to be the center of Scandinavian culture for the Midwest, and those that want to be, the most amazing place for handmade items, in the country. Communities have visions, and those need to get reflected in comprehensive plans and then sort of drill down into their ordinances. You can't make it happen without that. That's I think probably the biggest aha. There's also, I think, an aha that comes for community organizations that want to make a downtown or a neighborhood commercial district stronger, and it has to do with the nature of running an independent business. Is that it's a pretty lonely job, and independent business people have to be there all the time. So I always say when I come into communities and they're putting together an organization to revitalize a district, and they're all saying we need more merchants on this board or on these committees, and I'm like, the number one thing that a merchant can do or a small business owner can do to make the downtown healthy is to run a great kick-ass business. So if they're in meetings, they're not there, and the store is probably closed or the office is shut, and that's not good. So everybody has things they can bring to the table. That's what merchants bring. They need to do their job. So
That's great advice. I can't tell you how many board meetings I've been on where I know that Franzi Sharon is on this call, and Franzi's probably waving a hanky at this point. How many hours she's put in while she's trying to run her business.
right.
And so it's something we want to be open and empathetic, but sometimes it's just better just to go to them and just ask them what they need and let them run
Yeah.
their business.
Yeah.
There's a question that came from the audience about the question is, what's the opinion on single developer, single parcel, large projects versus multi-owner, multi-lot incremental development? I'm going to reserve my opinion, but I'm going to ask you, like, how would you deal with that in your community?
Well, I mean, I think, if you think about how downtowns evolved historically, they evolved one building at a time, with individual property owners who built them. And I kind of think that's the way to go. You're sharing the risk. If one developer is developing everything and something happens, you've got no safety net. I think there's strength in numbers. And so I like sort of the models of having a master developer who parcels things out to individual property owners and developers who can then take up the charge. And it gives you more diversity of, the way a place looks and feels.
Is there a city that's taken on the leadership to try to make that happen that you've had experience with, or anybody that's got a success story that you've seen?
Well, the first example that comes to mind, and it's sort of a work in progress at this point still, but is a developer sort of in the Northeast corridor called Renaissance Downtowns. You might have run into these people before at conferences and things. But it was a traditional development company for a long, long time. And the guy who started this company had this sort of epiphany one day where he was like, wait, I shouldn't be developing suburban stuff. I should be making cities be greater. And the way that he sort of does that is by helping the community come together through a whole crowdsourcing process to shape a vision for what a downtown district might be, and then works with local property owners to have them buy into sort of a shared development plan for the district. And he's worked so far in a couple of places on Long Island, Hempstead, Huntington Station, Bristol, Connecticut, Nashua, New Hampshire, a few other places. And I think that's an interesting model, not just from the master developer and property owner model, but also from the crowdsourcing model. In Bristol, Connecticut, they have 2,200 people who belong to this group called Bristol Rising, who are very enthusiastic about putting together a plan, and they all wear orange T-shirts. So when you have a planning commission hearing and 100 people in orange T-shirts show up in support of a plan, you know they're there. You can't miss them. So it's a nice community supported process.
Well, also I'd like to, back to your opening shot of the Sanborn maps. One of the interesting things that we've seen in the previous, I guess, the generation of buildings, some of these old hotels, old apartment buildings, even though it was a hotel, there was stock ownership in the community where they did crowdsourced funding of those buildings as like a stock back then. So it's kind of funny. It's like we actually have better technology to pull it off today, but we've kind of lost that memory that we could actually build local wealth by sponsoring individuals to build a hotel downtown, as opposed to waiting for a flag or a chain to come in and do it.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's something I still come across from time to time. Is there'll be a building that has been sitting vacant and boarded up for a while, and it's because, do you know who owns this? It's like 500 different people's grandchildren, and we have to track them all down. But it's rare. You don't find it too often. But now, of course, it's happening all over the place. You're seeing all kinds of crowdfunded solutions to developing new businesses and rehabbing, building new buildings.
We're going to do one more question before we open it up to the floor, but we've mentioned parking earlier. For me, there's not really one way to tackle the parking thing, and it's always a conversation in downtowns, but the question is, what would be your advice for a small town, less than 30,000 people, considering building a parking garage downtown?
You know, it's been kind of nice during the pandemic to not have people complaining about parking so much for a while. It's been really a relief to not hear that. But yeah, the parking thing always comes up. So I don't know. So here's the thing: if you have a truly walkable mixed-use district, you don't have a lot of need for parking because the people who live and work there are there. You just need like one parking space for every, 30 people or something. I don't know. I'm not a parking analyst, but you don't need that much. So again, it gets back to what is your overall plan for how you're going to sort of tenant and use the spaces in this district. If you had a lot of, William Reese harp makers from Rising Sun, you wouldn't need any parking downtown. So I think it's important to really be realistic. Parking garages are expensive buildings. And of course, it's better to integrate them into mixed use buildings if you can, so that it's not that you see this, glaring parking garage downtown, but you see, line or retail wrapped around it, and the parking garage kind of blends into the architectural fabric. So, I mean, it all starts for me with sort of an economic vision for the district and what its uses are going to be.
That's great. So from the chat room, we've got two questions that are actually pretty close to each other. So I'm going to read both questions because I think they are connected. The state of Florida has just adopted enabling laws and legislation to allow local governments to allow affordable housing in industrial zoning districts. Really? What could be some of the economic impacts to the people who have to live in industrial areas? Conversely, there's another question of, let's see, zoning when it comes to manufacturing.
Well,
so you've shown in the downtown you actually have some manufacturing going on that.
As it used to be. I mean, I'm sure most people on this call know all about sort of the story of Euclidean zoning in the U.S. and how we began segmenting out uses, and what a sort of nightmare that's created for communities where you have, low-income housing over here and high-income housing over here and schools here and shopping malls here and government here, and you have to get in a car and drive everywhere to get to everything. Nothing is walkable, and that's the byproduct of the kind of zoning system that we created back in the 1920s and 1930s. And communities are slowly undoing that. They're adopting form-based codes instead of that specify the form of a building instead of its uses. And that's what we need to make downtowns walkable, livable places again, is to sort of dismantle that sort of zoning structure. It's obviously, I think, one of the things that COVID again is revealing are the inequities in housing systems, and putting, low and moderate income housing next to an industrial only zone is just, it should be illegal. I mean, it's so cruel. So, we need to take that apart.
Yeah, and I think that I'll just give you from my trauma as a former zoning administrator in Florida. We focused on the manufacturing that was noxious and left that to its own. But manufacturing that was, somebody that was a cabinet maker downtown, it's like, as long as they weren't off gassing and doing petrochemicals or something like that, you could go ahead and build cabinets downtown. We don't care. So there are uses that can be sympathetic to living next door. Worst case scenario, unfortunately, we just stick all of our affordable housing next to something that is off gassing and obnoxious and highly industrial, and then that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think that would be definitely a concern. As far
Yeah.
as like, how would you open up manufacturing in other areas though? Like, what would you recommend as far as like getting things built in downtown again?
In terms of manufacturing?
Yeah, small manufacturing.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at, again, go back to the Sanborn maps and look at sort of the, the rhythm of things on the streets, you would often have blocks that would have sort of a higher concentration of retail uses, or sort of, front-facing uses. So it could be insurance agencies and restaurants and things like that are more or less kind of grouped together. But then on the side streets, you've got lumber yards and, tailors and every kind of sort of small manufacturing that you can think of, shoemakers and everything. They fit right in. They become the employee base for the district. They become the customers of the retail businesses, the people who work there. And they can be tucked in almost any place. Like I say, I think that we are with COVID, we're going to see a couple of waves of vacancies. We've actually already seen one with businesses that were undercapitalized and struggling as it was, kind of have closed quickly. We've lost 100,000 small businesses in the US so far since the beginning of the pandemic. Small, and small in my definition is not SBAs. I'm talking about businesses under 20 people, employees. And I think we're going to see another wave coming up, because a lot of businesses have kind of had the cash reserves to get by for like 4 to 5 months, and we're about to drop off that cliff. So without the federal government, state governments, or local governments putting together some programs quickly, I think we're going to see a new rash of those. The reality of that means there's going to be some vacancy in downtowns, as well as vacancies in shopping malls and shopping centers and hotels. I just heard that probably 8,000 hotels in the US will be closed permanently by the end of October. So there will be plenty of places to put small manufacturing back in the urban core.
Tied to that question is a question about how do you recommend community leaders and just how to start the conversation with property owners about renegotiating leases and basically getting in Asheville, we had, before COVID, we had the problem of rapidly escalating rents and that making it unstable for businesses to keep on their business. Are there tools that you'd recommend for that renegotiation or to discussion?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, this the report we just put out, ILSR just put out this morning, that I wrote on sort of 26 things that community leaders can do. One of those has to do with exactly that, with sort of helping with the lease negotiations, and also with making commercial space affordable for property for business owners. One of the things that has sort of happened quickly is that I think commercial tenants were nervous about bringing up the fact that they were having some rent distress, financial distress with their property owners, with their landlords. And so one thing that, a chamber of commerce, a Main Street organization, a BID, whoever it is can do, local government can do, is to sort of be the mediator, to bring people together and just say, how's it going? How's it going? So that they're talking to each other. And we're seeing a couple of different things. I think the most common thing I've seen so far is that property owners are saying, okay, you can't pay rent for 4 months. We're just going to take those 4 months of rent and push them to the end of your lease and amortize it, over the period of time that you do feel like things are picking back up again and make sense to you.
Wow.
Or converting leases to percentage leases. So instead of paying $18 a square foot per rent, business is now paying $12 a square foot plus, 1% of everything over $200,000 a year, and that gives the property owner a real vested interest in making sure that business succeeds too. And of course, we're seeing lots of communities that are creating their own programs to provide rent payments. And some of them are giving the money directly to the business owner, and some are paying them directly to the property owner to get them over this hump.
So another question was, I've actually given analysis of small businesses I was using Durango, Colorado versus the Walmart, and they paid 15 times the property tax of a Walmart per square foot, 5 times the retail sales per square foot of a Walmart, and it was like 230 jobs per acre versus Walmart's 20. So they're more tax productive retail property tax, but also more jobs produced. And as you know, that bookstore on Main Street's probably paying their retail sector employee more per hour than the Walmart retail sector employee.
For sure.
And I just proffered the question: who's hiring the local attorney? Who's hiring the local accountant? Who's hiring the local website designer? So not only are you getting more money, you're also getting more transference into the community.
Yeah.
I tend to shy away from a multiplier effect number because they become traps, or
Yeah.
I see them as that. But do you have have you all seen a number that's reasonable to get people into the mindset of understanding small business and the local business and their effect to the neighborhood, the community?
Well, one metric, and this does vary from community to community based on what its business composition is, but one of the sort of the rules of thumb that I've used for years, because I've seen it borne out over and over and over again, is that you can expect that locally owned businesses are probably returning 60, 70 cents per dollar in sales to the community, because they are hiring local, they're buying local, their bank deposits are local, everything is local. Chain retailers, probably something in the 40 cents per dollar, and big box stores somewhere in the 20 cents per dollar. So huge amount of money is leaving town with the big boxes. The economic impact on the community is, can be devastating over time. And then the worst thing is when the big box closes.
Yeah.
And it's killed everyone else. So there's no small
Well,
business community left.
And as you mentioned, the overbuilding, was it 40 times more than we had in 1960?
Yeah,
per
10 times. Yeah,
capita?
from
10
4
times
square
more?
feet to 41. Yep.
Yeah, 10 times more per square feet per person.
Yep.
So there's going to be that kind of cramming down of real estate. So I guess we're going to have a lot more churches in big boxes or something, because that's seems to be the only use that converts. I started the show today talking about equity. Our city just passed a reparations resolution.
Oh, I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard it. And so, I'm just like, well, what does that mean? What are we going to do? Are we just going to talk about it? Or are we going to actually do something? Are we going to remove single family zoning? Because that's well documented right here in the color of law.
Yep.
Or, there's things we can actually do. When it comes to the destruction that we've done to the African American community, not only at a housing level, but also at a business level, because a lot of the urban renewal projects were done in the African American neighborhoods. In Charlotte, in the Brooklyn neighborhood, there was something like 200 businesses that were just carved out of that community. We now know about Tulsa and what happened there. What could we do to solve the past racist policies, to be anti-racist at an African American business level, to help rebuild what was destroyed in their community?
Well, I think 2 major things are zoning and banking. Those are the biggies, and you've talked about zoning, but the banking thing is, because people of color, women, and to an extent veterans, just have not had the access to capital that other business owners have, and so that's why they have disproportionately not gotten as much from the Paycheck Protection Program as other businesses, because they don't have the banking relationships established to apply for the forgivable loan. So that's really crucial. ILSR actually has a great report that came out a few months ago on the the sort of better, more community healthy lending practices of community banks and credit unions, and community development financial institutions, CDFIs, because they are really, they're banking with the community, and they really are invested in the community. An interesting thing I saw a week or two ago is that the Fresno County, California government pension fund, government workers pension fund, and like any other government pension fund in the country, they tend to, invest in this giant sort of national pool of loans. They realized actually we need to be doing more local small business loans, and more local other kinds of sort of small business investments. So we're now going to start buying locally generated loans instead, so that we can increase the liquidity that we have locally. I thought it was just a brilliant idea. And communities, any community can do that through a linked deposits program or something, creating more liquidity so that locally owned banks can actually do more small business lending.
I want to thank you for that. And also, let me just go ahead and hammer on that a little bit more. Because Josh McCarty, our lead analyst, I hope Josh is in here. Josh quipped when he got to experience Buffalo. I grew up in upstate New York, and his first experience with Buffalo was mind-blowing because he grew up in the South. So he got to experience a Rust Belt town that's basically vaporized itself. I grew up in it. But one of the comments that he made just off the cuff, he's like, they should link their pension plan to their city's tax performance. So that way people can't just do their job and then retire to Florida and get a paycheck from the city of Buffalo until they pass away. And I think we need to think about cities that way, that if you do work for them, you should put your money where your mouth is. You should grow your community's wealth. And if you're serious about starting an African American business within your community, link your pension fund to that. It's like put your money back into the community and grow everybody's pie and wealth together. So I want to thank you for mentioning that, because we tend to realize we see these systems as, oh, we can't touch them, we can't talk about them, but they're all under our control. Moses didn't deliver us this stuff, right? So we can work on it. But
Robert Moses certainly didn't.
Oh, not Robert Moses. Speaking of which, there is a question about
Joe, we're right at 2 o'clock, just FYI.
Yeah, I don't want to let you know this question came, but I don't necessarily, because we could talk about this for the rest of the day, but Trump's tweet about we're all coming after the suburbs now. It's, what can you say? It's a tweet. And
100 more days.
Yeah, at least it's that we're not on Agenda 21 anymore. But yeah, actually, Kennedy, I want to thank you for your time. We're at 2 o'clock.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just hang on for a little second,
Sure.
and we'll just turn this off and thank everybody for that. Oh, sorry. Let me do one more thing. I've got to show this. If you have Kennedy, if you have a plug of anything that you want to recommend to the audience here, of resources, a website or anything, do you anything to share?
I was trying to put something in chat, but I would just say go to ilsr.org, look for the Independent Business Initiative, and look at the reports that are there. There's a huge wealth of data and sort of guides and ideas for communities to draw upon there.
Okay, and everyone, we do this once a month, last Thursday of every month. Send us your questions. There's a link to us on our webpage at urban-3.com /events, and you can find us in there. Send us your comments, questions. If you have featured guests that you'd like us to track down as well. And Kennedy, this is a blast. I could do this all week long with you.
Fun.
The blast. And thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And everyone, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar if you want to share it with anyone else in the next few days. So look for that in your inbox, as well as a registration for next month's webinar.
And Kate, I seem to have lost control of the panel here and the how to turn things off. So if you want to stop the share.
Sure. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. And I'm trying to grab Franzi and introduce Franzi to Kennedy real quick. Is it still, oh, here's the record.
I just turned the recording off.
Okay. Where's the end thing?